Imagine standing in the ruins of a 1945 airfield, staring at a jet unlike anything you've ever seen. Sleek, wing-shaped, no tail, almost alien in its form. This wasn't science fiction, it was Nazi. Germany's Ho-29, a flying wing so advanced, it whispered stealth long before stealth even existed. Before we dive into this fascinating journey of wartime innovation, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our explorations into history's most extraordinary machines. Your support fuels our mission to make the past alive, engaging and meaningful for everyone who seeks to learn. To appreciate the Ho-29, we must first step into the late years of World War II. By 1943 and 1944, the tides of war were turning sharply against Germany. Allied bombers, B-17 flying fortresses in Lancaster, heavies were raining destruction across German cities, factories, and infrastructure. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, was bleeding. The skies over Europe were now ruled by swarms of Allied aircraft. Traditional German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190 were fast becoming outdated. They simply could not reach the altitudes, nor endure the sheer numbers of Allied bombing raids. Germany's leadership became desperate for a new kind of weapon, Wunderwaffe or wonder weapon, that could turn the tide. This desperation wasn't just military. Morale on the home front was faltering. Cities were in ruins, fuel was scarce, and pilots were dying faster than they could be trained. Yet within this grim picture, some of the most radical, forward-thinking ideas in aviation history emerged. Among them, the Horten Ho 229, a sleek, jet-powered flying wing unlike anything the world had seen. Why a flying wing? To the untrained eye, it looked strange, even alien. No tail, no fuselage jutting out, just a smooth wing sweeping back into elegant curves. But to engineers like Reimar and Walter Horten, two brothers with a passion for gliders and efficiency, the flying wing was the shape of the future. A design with less drag, more lift, and potentially harder to spot on radar. The Ho 229 didn't just emerge from a blueprint, it came from decades of experimentation by the Horten brothers. Long before jets, they were fascinated by tailless aircraft. As early as the 1930s, they were sketching and building gliders shaped like wings, hoping to prove that such a craft could fly not only beautifully, but efficiently. So when the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the German Air Ministry, issued a desperate call for a jet-powered fighter that could carry bombs, fly at 1,000 kilometers per hour, and still cover 1,000 kilometers in range, the Hortens knew they had the answer. They proposed their radical flying wing, powered by the new turbojet engines that were just becoming available. It was a gamble. Germany was running out of time, resources, and trained engineers. But the Ho 229 was greenlit, and in the ashes of war, one of history's most remarkable aircraft took shape. Reimar and Walter Horten were not the stereotypical Nazi engineers we often imagine. They were not hardened party members, nor men obsessed with ideology. They were dreamers, aviation enthusiasts, tinkerers, and self-taught innovators. Walter the elder became a Luftwaffe pilot. Reimar the younger dedicated himself to designing gliders and unconventional aircraft. Both believed passionately in the flying wing. They argued that by removing the fuselage and tail, drag could be minimized, creating an aircraft both sleek and efficient. The brothers had been experimenting with flying wing gliders since their teenage years. In competitions, their designs often surprised more traditional engineers. What they lacked in formal training, they made up for in intuition and persistence. By the time the war broke out, they were already known for daring, unconventional designs. The Horten brothers had little love for bureaucracy. Reimar especially found himself frustrated by the rigid demands of the Luftwaffe hierarchy. Yet when the Air Ministry called for a next-generation fighter, their chance had come. They could finally prove that the flying wing was more than a dream. It could be a war machine. Of course, wartime Germany was not an easy place to innovate. Resources were scarce, politics were treacherous, and rival companies like Messerschmitt and Junkers guarded their own projects jealously. The Hortens had to fight not just physics but politics, and yet they pushed forward. Using whatever materials they could, plywood, steel tubing, and later, even radar-absorbing mixes of coal dust and glue, they shaped their vision. It was more than just another Luftwaffe project. For the brothers, the Ho 229 represented a philosophy that the future of flight belonged to the wing. Now let's pause and really look at the Ho-229's design, because this is where its magic and its mystery truly lies. Unlike conventional aircraft with a fuselage and tail, the Ho-229 was essentially a single broad wing. The cockpit and engines were integrated into the wing itself. This created a streamlined profile, minimizing drag and maximizing lift. To modernize, it looks eerily like the American B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, built almost 50 years later. The aircraft was designed to use two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet engines, the same type powering Germany's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me 262. These engines, mounted in nacelles near the wing roots, provided the thrust needed to push the aircraft toward speeds of nearly 1,000 kilometers per hour, faster than almost any Allied plane of the time. But the real genius lay in the details. Though radar was still primitive in the 1940s, the Hortens had an instinct that their wing-shaped plane would reflect less radar energy than conventional aircraft. They even experimented with a special coating, wood, bonded with coal dust that absorbed radar waves. This is stunning, because the concept of stealth wouldn't become mainstream until the 1970s and 1980s. The engines were mounted on top of the wing rather than underneath. This meant that from below, the angle enemy, fighters and anti-aircraft guns would most often see the heat signature was partially shielded by the wing. Again, infrared detection wasn't widely used in the 1940s, but the Hortens had an instinct for how visibility worked, both to the human eye and to sensors. By eliminating unnecessary drag, the flying wing could carry more fuel and travel farther. Germany needed fighters that could intercept Allied bombers before they reached their targets, and the Ho-229's projected range offered hope. With aluminum scarce in wartime Germany, the Hortens built much of the plane from wood, plywood bonded with glue. Ironically, this not only conserved metal but also made the aircraft harder to detect on radar. What necessity forced, innovation transformed. Of course, it was not perfect. Stability was an issue. Without a tail, controlling yaw and pitch required careful balancing. The brothers solved this with advanced control surfaces, elevons, that combined the roles of elevators and ailerons. It was tricky, but it worked. Seen through today's eyes, the Ho-229 looks like a time traveler's machine, dropped into the wrong century. Its sleek silhouette, its blended engines, its instinct for stealth, it foreshadowed a future nobody in 1944 could fully grasp. Building prototypes in wartime Germany was no small feat. Fuel was rationed. Skilled workers were drafted. Allied bombings destroyed factories. Yet against these odds, the first Ho-229, prototype called the V1, took to the skies in December 1944. This version was a glider to test aerodynamics. It flew smoothly, proving the flying wing concept. Encouraged, the Hortens pressed on to build a jet-powered version, the V2. In February 1945, the V2 prototype flew with its twin Jumo jet engines. Test pilots reported astonishing speed and performance. The aircraft was agile, faster than almost anything the Allies had. It promised to be both a bomber interceptor and a strike aircraft. But tragedy struck. On one test flight, the V2 crashed, killing its pilot. Some blamed engine failure, others structural weakness. Wartime prototypes often faced such risks. Still, the promise of the Ho-229 was clear enough that the Luftwaffe ordered more. Plans were drawn for production, and a factory was being prepared. Yet time was running out. By spring 1945, Allied forces were advancing into Germany. The war's end was inevitable. Only a handful of incomplete Ho-229 prototypes existed when American troops captured the facilities. When U.S. forces advanced into Germany, they swept up not only documents and scientists but also experimental aircraft. The Ho-229 was among the most prized discoveries. One unfinished prototype, the V3, was shipped to the United States under Operation Seahorse, a cousin to the better-known Operation Paperclip. That prototype still exists today. It resides in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center, carefully preserved as a relic of radical wartime innovation. Visitors often stop in awe, struck by how modern it looks, how much it resembles the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. Engineers and historians continue to debate. How stealthy was the Ho-229? Really? Tests done in the early 2000s by Northrop Grumman, the company behind the B-2, suggested the aircraft would indeed have had a smaller radar cross-section than conventional W-2 fighters. Not invisible, but harder to detect, enough to give it an edge. It never saw combat. It never flew missions against Allied bombers. Yet the Ho-229 left behind a haunting question. What if? The Ho-229 stands as one of the most advanced, visionary aircraft of World War. Yeah, but its significance goes beyond technical achievement. It was a glimpse of stealth, long before stealth was a doctrine. The idea that shaping an aircraft could reduce radar visibility was decades ahead of its time. The Hortens didn't have advanced computers to calculate radar signatures. They worked by intuition, yet they were right. It was also a philosophy. Today's most advanced bombers, like the B-2 Spirit and the upcoming B-21 Raider, are flying wings. They embody the very idea the Horten brothers fought for in the 1940s, that the most efficient aircraft is one that is all-wing. Wartime Germany was collapsing, yet in the chaos, visionaries like the Hortens pushed boundaries. This reminds us that human ingenuity often shines brightest under the darkest circumstances, though tragically in this case, in service of a destructive cause. Reimar Horten later emigrated to Argentina, where he continued designing flying wings. He lived into the 1990s, witnessing the rise of stealth aircraft. One can only imagine his thoughts seeing the B-2 Spirit soar, a machine that bore the unmistakable echoes of his wartime dream. The Ho-229 was not perfect. It was fragile, underpowered, and untested in combat. But as a vision, it was breathtaking. It bridged the world of propeller-driven dogfights in the coming era of jet-powered, radar-evading stealth aircraft. What lessons does the Ho-229 leave for us today? It teaches us that innovation often comes from outsiders, from dreamers willing to challenge orthodoxy. The Horten brothers were not part of the mainstream aircraft industry, yet their ideas reshaped the future. It reminds us that technology is always a double-edged sword. The Ho-229 could have been a terror in the skies, shooting down Allied bombers, yet its design philosophy ultimately contributed to peacekeeping. Aircraft like the B-2 designed not to wage world wars, but to deter them. And it shows us the strange beauty of history. Out of one of humanity's darkest chapters came a machine that pointed toward the future of flight. It's a paradox, brilliance born in tragedy, vision forged in desperation. When you stand before the preserved Ho-229 today, you don't just see an aircraft. You see a story of two brothers who believed in the dream of the wing, a story of a world at war, desperate for miracles, a story of how ideas once unleashed can ripple across decades, shaping technologies far beyond their time. The Ho-229 was never truly stealth, but it was something just as extraordinary, a glimpse into the future. It proved that even in the 1940s, the seeds of tomorrow's technology were already sprouting. Its smooth wing, its radar-absorbing skin, its hidden engines, all pointed to an age when invisibility would matter as much as speed. Today we can look back with awe, not just at the machine but at the minds behind it. The Horten brothers were dreamers in a desperate age. Their creation never changed the war, but it forever changed the conversation about what aircraft could be. When you next see a B-2 bomber glide silently overhead, remember, its shadow stretches all the way back to 1945, and to a pair of brothers who imagined the impossible